Matron of Grimhaven Orphanage, yes, I was. But that was many years ago. At the risk of sounding unkind, I must say, it was never my intent in life to bear responsibility for an orphanage, and certainly not one of such tragic notoriety as Grimhaven. No, that plan was surely the Lord's, and the part I played simply the path he set before me. For my heart's desires were like so many of the gentler sex, and comprised of a loving husband, a home, children of one's own. Unfulfilled dreams, the lot. Please do not mistake me as a heartless woman, for Grimhaven was oft a happy place, and the children joyful and willful. But there hung about the buildings a pall of melancholy that frequently chilled my bones, and I was not the only one to note this strangeness, for I know for a fact it played in our caretaker's mind. Oh yes, this was long before the taking of the children, the tragedy. I would prefer not to discuss those events for my own peace of mind, for I am a sensitive woman who has lived with this sadness for too many years, and the distress lingers still in my heart. You know, the whole saga sent Mr. Crow, our caretaker, quite mad. Dear man. He lived alone in Grimhaven for years after everyone else had long departed. But enough of this, for regret does little to ease the soul. However, I am willing to recall earlier times and more wholesome memories. Mind, that is not to say all events that took place were wholesome, but I fear I am running ahead with my prattle. How I became burdened with the responsibility and care of Grimhaven and those who sheltered within its walls is of little consequence. Suffice to say, I had at one time been a governess and engaged to be married to a young man who did not place the same importance on his word and character as he did on his future prospects. I am surely grateful I discovered his deceit in a timely manner before we were wed, for I was a woman of modest means and good heart, unlike the wealthy young miss whom he eventually married. I heard they were very unhappy together for many, many years. At that time, my employer was a member of Grimhaven's Board of Trustees, and it was his kindness and sympathy towards my plight which resulted in my future being secured through the board's offering me the position of matron. A position of care and responsibility I bore for 23 years. To my mind, the orphans were rather like apples, some sweet and wholesome, some thick-skinned with a bitter taste, and then there were those who had only a spot or two of rot that needed rooting out with a sharp paring knife to make them wholly good. And lastly, the other kind, thankfully rare, but by far the most distasteful of all. Do you follow my meaning? No? Well, let me explain, dear. For I am speaking of the apple that is plucked from the tree, ripe and sparkling. The apple that takes pride of place in the fruit bowl for its scent, color, and beauty of God's design. But when cut with a knife, its true core is exposed. A core that is brown, rotten through and infested with writhing maggots. Oh, yes, we had an orphan such as I have just described. An evil boy. And I have little doubt that he was in some way to blame for the terrible events that took place, though I know not how. 'Tis true the devil makes work for idle hands, and I instructed my staff to ensure there was little opportunity for such. Every morning before lessons the girls would perform domestic duties, whilst the boys drew water from the well and swept the yard. After a simple but wholesome breaking of the fast, lessons were held until lunch, after which the children worked out in the orchard or upstairs in the sewing and carpentry rooms, the results of their toil being sold to contribute to their charitable upkeep. Prayers were conducted morning and night, and 4 times on the Sabbath day, in between 2 sermons preached under the wandering eyes of Pastor Cuthbert Povey, a bow-legged inferior example of a man, for whom I had little time or respect, save that he did appear genuinely kind to the children. However, over time it became abundantly clear to me that his ministrations towards some members of staff were rather more familiar than godly, and combined with an alarming decrease in our cellared bottles of communion wine, I was little sorry to be rid of him. Odd, though, that he should leave behind his priestly attire on departing. The constabulary suspected foul play on his part, but I doubt he would have had the wits or capability to carry out such a plan, for he appeared weak and spineless, a self-serving fellow to my memory. I noted, too, that his garments were not all Cuthbert Povey left behind. Marguerite, the cook, the object of his dalliance, though not the only one, was also discarded and in a dreadful state, too. Her reputation, such that it was in tatters, and as I recall, she moved away to her sister's out east for a good 9 months after Povey's departure. Foolish girl. Oh, she was capable enough in the kitchen, but prone to the most hysterical outbursts, and without a maternal bone in her body. She was intolerant of the children, more especially the girls, and at times cruel. Marguerite would repeatedly confiscate Dorothy's doll. What was it named? Gloria, that's it. The wee girl adored it. A gift from her late mother, as I recall. Where was I? Oh, yes. Marguerite would place the doll high out of Dorothy's reach, though the child had done no wrong. It was a heartless trick, and one I chastised her for on many occasions. Marguerite, with cruel, hard crow's eyes, and likewise a penchant for glittering objects. I blame her for the disappearance of my beautiful music box, Parisian, you know, with a dancing ballerina and very exotic. I would swear on the Holy Bible that she was the one who took it, if only the Lord would permit me to do so. Her confidant was Hattie, one of the older girls, and a cunning little light-fingered miss, too. With a forked tongue like a lizard, her lies were boundless, so perhaps it was her. But no, it is not fair of me to accuse one of the unfortunate taken ones of such a mischief. I am certain it was Marguerite. But the boy, the evil child to whom I referred earlier, Rupert Murdoch. He came to us as a 5-year-old, his parents and baby sister having succumbed to typhoid in the city. It was a miracle the child survived it all, for his hair and clothes were matted with filth and infested with vermin. He appeared quite steady and placid of nature, an extraordinarily pretty child, as I recall, and wholly undisturbed by the loss of his loved ones. I never heard him ask for any of them, not ever. Like the shiny apple that he was, Rupert proved an exceptionally gifted child, with a sharp intellect who excelled at his lessons. However, by the time he was 16, the same year as the tragedy, Rupert had grown into a young man with some oddly disturbing ways. He warmed to no one and kept solely to his own company, save that of any spiders he found, for he delighted in collecting the loathsome things and frightening the younger children with them. Like Marguerite, Rupert harbored a cruel streak, and would lock anyone who crossed him in the cellar without remorse. Timepieces, too, the boy would thieve them whenever the opportunity presented itself. Clocks of all shapes and sizes, even men's pocket watches. I would regularly collect his loot from beneath his bed, but he was never contrite and would duly re-offend, much to my annoyance. I was regrettably unable to break him of his habit, although I tried many methods and punishments. Now, what I'm about to tell you is something I have never uttered to a living soul, and no doubt it would be more prudent to keep my counsel, but the years are passing for me so rapidly it seems that perhaps my sharing this with you may help to shed a glimmer of light on the events that took place. so long ago at Grimhaven. Although in frankness I fear that all my words will do is add further mystery to the already mysterious. It seems peculiar on reflection that the week prior to the children's disappearance, I suffered a most disturbing dream which left me wakened, cold, and trembling in my bed. It was so many years ago, yet I still vividly recall an enormously vile creature, half man, half spider, looming over my bed as if to strike me, whilst all around dozens of pocket watches were ticking with a dreadful intensity of sound. I felt as if I were spinning and falling or rising, I could not tell. I remember Rupert, for he was there, right there within my dream, laughing and gleeful with such animation as I have never seen upon his face in all the years I had known him. The wretched boy grinned as if mocking me, and then slowly, deliberately wound one pocket watch so that the hands moved backwards around its face, as if time itself was running backwards. All the while he stared with such malevolence. Choking hands were around my throat, and the giddy sensation became so violent that I awoke in terror, half out of my bedclothes, with my own hands clutched tight at my neck, causing me to feel dreadfully dizzy and quite ill. Some time later, when I had eventually regained my composure, common sense deemed that I blamed the nightmare on Marguerite's pudding, which always had far too much cinnamon for my taste. Quite excessive. Wasteful girl. It was not until I heard poor Mr. Crowe's ramblings before the judge that I realized the experience of which he spoke was uncannily similar to the visions that so disrupted my slumber. Indeed, I was greatly disturbed, but after some reflection thought better than to trouble the authorities with a foolish woman's imaginings. For surely what else could it be but mere coincidence? My other motivation was perhaps less considerate, but more honest, and I will confess as much to you now. It was clear to me that Grimhaven's days were numbered, for who would want any part of such an ill-fated establishment? I was a single woman, remember. I had no husband to support me in my dotage, and would need to find work elsewhere before the taint of tragedy entirely dismembered my employment prospects. So that is what I did. Nothing. For what could I do in the end but to save myself? There was, after all, no one else left to save, except a mad old caretaker and some run-down ruins. Now, dear, tea.